Hey guys, so I brought on a friend of mine here who's a psych student, and um, he has a lot to say about, I guess, what you could call pseudoscience, kind of what I think is important to kind of discuss, which is how science has gone from kind of stereotypical mad scientist always trying to buck the trend and try and figure out what the hell is going on with the world and whatever study that he's in, to this very sanitized, very controlled environment where it's almost like the conclusion is made before the study is even done. And especially with kind of how I guess everyone is kind of aware of this at this point, which is how news media, academia are all kind of intertwined in this web of, hey, push this narrative, get this narrative passed, make it sound legit. And it's to the point that the left hand doesn't even know what the right one is doing. I see it. I won't get into it, but I see it literally every day at this point, where you'll have one news agency or think tank or arm of the government saying one thing, and then literally another arm of the government, or Biden or whoever, say the complete opposite, and pertaining to the coof and you know what. So, so I thought it would be good. Just introduce yourself. Tell us, who you are and what got you into this and what your study is.
Well, I'm Ryan. I'll kind of leave it at that.
Nice.
I'm a psych student. I got into psych, I want to say around the time I turned maybe like 19, 23 now. Growing up, I had a lot of friends who had less desirable experiences than me. A lot of them had a lot of problems. And throughout my life, kind of observing people with issues, I kind of got curious about just kind of how people work, what makes people tick, how people can use that knowledge to kind of help each other out. Because one of the hardest things for us to understand is ourselves a lot of the time, especially when it comes to the human mind, because everybody's different, especially when you're talking about working in the field. All treatments are different for different people. It's a very difficult thing to kind of put together and realize with 100% certainty.
Yeah, and I think especially, especially nowadays. I mean, I've gotten into the cluster A, B, and C personality disorders, mainly because of my own family, having people like that in my own family, in my own life, where it's just become one miscellaneous curiosity of mine that I've really tried to understand, and a giant disproportionate amount of homeless people have schizophrenia.
Oh, yeah.
So it's not even really like everyone, especially conservatives, they'll be like, well, we just need, those damn people need to get a job. Most of these people don't even know what reality is.
They don't even know what reality is, or they're so depressed and far gone that they can't function in normal society half the time. And then it's a lot more complicated than
they get
these
scorned.
people just getting a fucking job.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, I guess we could move on to a real meaty question here. It was originally, what is basically the before and after of modern science, but I elaborate on it here. What do you think has changed in terms of quote unquote established science and how academia views science? Yeah, go ahead.
I want to say a lot, but also very little at the same time.
Okay.
Over the years, now for the most part on the official level, we definitely put a lot of practice, or I guess laws and regulations in to make sure ethics are going okay. Certain organizations like oh god, my mind just went blank.
That's cool. No, take your time.
I'm trying to think of what it's called. IRB, an institutional. We have things like institutional review boards that review research structure before people go about doing official research. There's a lot of checks and balances being put in place, which is a good thing. Back in the day, there were not a lot of checks and balances, and things like the Tuskegee study happened.
Yes.
in which you and I kind of mentioned briefly.
Yes.
For the most part, technology and ethics on the official level, but people still, even back then, still go off of bias. There were studies built kind of to self-affirm, because one of the biggest problems with, and I'm going to keep going for a sec. one of the things with how people build their theories is that people build theories to prove themselves. But the problem is that when you build a theory, you want to disprove yourself, or try to, because if you can't disprove yourself, then okay, you've got something. You're onto something. If you're trying to just shoot the living crap out of your theory and it just won't die, you have something. Because the problem with trying to affirm a theory that you're creating, if you go in with that goal, if you go in expecting to be completely right, you're going to be looking for the affirming information, and you're going to be biased. And that's happened a lot. If you look at like extreme vasectomies and how they used to just, if a woman had even a little bit of breast cancer, they just cut off her boobs.
Wow.
And, in any circumstance. Yeah. I can't remember the exact year, the time span that was in. I think that was around like early 1900s or like late 1800s, something like that.
Yeah.
But I mean, it even happens in medical practice. It's not just science, or psychology. I mean,
that's interesting.
But what was happening? What was happening there is something we call, I think it has more so to do with confirmation bias, where the doctors that started doing that, they were only paying attention to the women that got better after their breasts were removed, and didn't take into account that about half the time, or most of the time, a lot of the women that they performed those mastectomies on were still dying of cancer. And they were like, no, it works for some people, so we're just going to keep doing it all the time, and it might work. That's one of the most common forms of bias.
Yeah.
In terms of running studies and research.
That's the interesting thing. I've been reading Leviathan, and it's funny because Thomas Hobbes brought up that point about, I'm not going to try and spur this into spirituality, but this is an important thing to make, is that, you don't have to learn, or rather you don't, faith and belief are disconnected from reality on its own. Like believing in God and praying, it's like he says there's no real intelligence in that. And when we're in I was actually just watching Norm Macdonald, rest in peace, video where he was talking about how science is always changing, and it's kind of hard to not have skepticism when you hear some guy saying something like, it's, you watch Carl Sagan's Cosmos and he's just saying all this crazy shit. And it's like, it's fun or whatever, and there's some good things about it, about that show. And I watched it when I was a kid and I really liked it, but then you watch it again, you're like, okay, all of this kind of seems like, isn't that all like theoretical, and it just seems like every other week there's a new, oh, well, actually it's this. And so it's kind of hard to put your devout belief in what
and
one scientist says. And then I was actually kind of curious, unless you have something else to say here, about if you have anything to say about peer review. But
yes, that peer review is essential. And the problem is nowadays we are in a peer review crisis where not enough of it is happening, because people,
interesting,
especially people going into science. Because here's the thing with scientists, or any official from any walk of life, any field, is that they're human beings. Human beings, no matter their education or their, whatever they've got behind them, they're all just as equally capable of trying to push their own agendas, or making mistakes, or having bias. And peer review is really important.
But the thing is,
the thing is, people are more concerned with coming up with new ideas so that they can be famous, get Nobel Prizes, because peer review doesn't get you as famous as coming up with some new crazy theory.
Yeah.
But the problem is that we've got all these fucking theories being thrown around all over the place, and it's hard to know where to start because everybody's just trying to come up with something new. And another problem is that a lot of people will run studies, not really be too detailed on how well they do it, whether they doctor information or edit information to their liking, and they can avoid going through peer review articles by just going to some fucking journalist and paying their company like $600 fee to publish an article that they want published.
Wow.
So then you have all this public domain crap where these people can run bad research and just throw it out to the public like that, because journalists don't care about science. They don't. A lot of the time they just
want a hot new.
They want something new. It's all about it's all about just getting people to look at your pieces and to get money, yada yada. That's really what it is.
Okay, so what's interesting is I don't know what you'd call it. Maybe on like the sort of, I don't know what you'd call it. I don't want to say the algo words. So when it comes to peer review, what I've noticed, maybe I guess from conservative, skeptical-ish points of view about what the ether of scientists who have not just, you go back to the early 1900s, the consensus was that eugenics is good and all this, give a, what did they do with the lobotomy? Lobotomies are...
Oh, I actually had something ready for lobotomies when we start talking about stuff, but you can start with it.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Well, I won't mess with that too much, but there are certain things like that you go back to the early 1900s and they're like, oh yeah, that's just how you fix that problem. But then you go to now.
Well, yeah, that's the same deal with the mastectomies. Yeah. Yes,
exactly right. And so that's interesting because everyone says peer review has become like this bullshit thing where it's like, oh, this liberal scientist, this group of scientists at MIT don't like what you have to say, even if it seems true. For instance, about like, how transgenderism, or I guess what you'd call dissociative identity disorder, how that has become like a bad word when it's like when you just look at it from a very Einstein like I'm not like a truly scientific point of view, you would look at something like dissociative identity disorder and say, oh, this is related to all these other pathologies. This is normally caused by some kind of molestation at a young age or some kind of trauma. But we're treating it as not only a normal thing, but like this good thing, when really, I mean, apart from just whatever spiritual and religious woes that it causes, woes with society. Mm-hmm. When you, like, for instance, I saw this interview with this chick who had multiple personality disorder, or whatever that that's DID. Excuse me.
Well, yeah.
Transgender is, I forgot what they call it, but DID is...
Yeah. DID can be multiple personality. I have my own things about multiple personality disorders. Okay. I think it's kind of bullshit, to be honest.
Interesting. But I would love to hear that, but... I actually really I kind of agree with you, but for instance, I saw this interview with this dude. This is a while back, but
you're probably thinking of like dysphoria.
Yeah, like this chick, she had she had this deal where it was like, oh, I have my other personalities. But what the guy said to her, what the interviewer said to her, really pissed me off, because he said, well, actually, who really knows what identity you have, Sarah, like the actual Sarah? He's like, well, the other identities are just this. It's like, no, this chick, assuming she really does have this issue where she doesn't know who she is and she fucking goes from personality to personality like nothing, that's not good to tell her that that's an okay thing. This is an illness of the mind and must be... We shouldn't just say this is an okay thing, accept it. We should say this is an illness. Let's figure out how we can remedy it, and not not in like an early 1900s just lobotomize her way, but in a like, what medicine can we do? What fucking herbal remedies or what therapy, what spirituality could help. Right. So it's become a really bizarre. Like, everything is either focused, and I hate to be the guy, but like, it's either just a big pharma answer, or it's you're just an insensitive racist answer. So it's like it's
yeah.
as if,
Well, and the thing with
it's as if peer review is bullshit, but it's almost. But you make a good point. Like maybe there is an actual a shortage of decent peer review.
Yeah, there is a shortage of decent peer review. The scientific community is actually calling it a peer review crisis right now.
Wow. Okay.
Where we just nobody can get peer review done, or the peer review that gets done is it's just as BS as anything else. That's a problem. Is that and that's like when having to take a research methods class, they make you do that now because of how much just ad hoc BS gets thrown into the scientific community, and it's hard to make any progress at that point. But the problem with those kinds of politics getting put into like science and stuff like that, especially
Psychology.
with psychology, well, and people that are a part of, like, I guess you could say disenfranchised groups, is that when you try to label things as mental illness, it's kind of demonized for some reason. But the problem is, or the thing is that if it's seen as a mental illness, then it almost how do I want to say this? It validates it even more, in my opinion, rather than it being demonized, because then society will want to help you. Society will want to give you the things that you need to feel better about yourself.
Right. And I think that's so we could actually, that's an interesting thing. There's this spiritual trauma. I'm doing it again. There's this spiritual, like, as the Prudentialist calls it on YouTube. Last guy I interviewed, really smart dude. He has I didn't have a word for it, but it's spiritual malaise, where you have this just giant swath of Zoomers and millennials who have turned, their God. They don't have a God, and they don't have a spirituality. They didn't grow up with it, and even worse, like in my situation, I didn't really have a spiritual or religious community at all when I was a kid, other than going to temple with my Jewish grandparents every now and then. And that was Reform Judaism. That was like very liberal, happy-go-lucky Judaism, not like the let's get down into the Bible type Judaism. Yeah, or into the
dark side of the brutal side of Judaism.
Yeah. It was the play guitar and dance around Judaism.
Kind of like non-denominational churches with like youth
almost
groups,
it was almost like going to I don't know, like
the same thing.
I don't want to say Unitarian church, because Unitarians are terrible, but it's almost as that level of liberal. But anyway, people like me, I went through all sorts of dumb crap that I shouldn't have gone through when I was a teenager. All sorts of
I can tell you all the satanic crap I was wanting to get into when I was in high school. Holy shit!
Well, I went through I went through spiritual, political, sexual confusion through my entire teenager years, and
a lot of people do from our generation.
Yes, and then what do? They turn their comic books or some shit, and like you said, they end up their mental health issues end up being not even like an intentional thing.
Points,
right? It's not intentional.
Kind of like trading cards.
Yes, yeah, it's like trading cards. Like, hey, yes, dude, exactly. Like a Yu-Gi-Oh! Dude, it's like when I played Yu-Gi-Oh! As a kid. It's the exact same thing. Like, hey,
it romanticizes it, and it shouldn't.
And it's almost a survival mechanism for the spiritually malaised, bored youth. Like probably solid like 15 years old right now to 35 years old.
I've never really looked at that as like a replacement for spirituality, but you make a really good point.
Right.
Is that people kind of are using
it's the survival mechanism
and romanticizing mental illness as a part of like spirituality.
Yes, sir.
As a replacement for spirituality. That's a really interesting way of putting it.
When you don't have this, like, and it was I think the Academic Agent's last cigar stream they were talking about how in China, they got the social credit score system. And
I'm sorry, I just laugh about that because all the social credit memes.
I know that they're my favorite memes actually right now. I've been really enjoying them. But there's like derivatives of that system and how it all happens. But they made a good point. Like, this is what happens when you have a society that's like entirely atheist. because they don't have a god or like a religion you can just import and make people believe. They don't have a Kim Jong-un even they can make into a state god. So they have to like actually have pro-social laws that keep people from being degenerates because they don't care. So that's kind of what I would see America falling into, but even worse, because at least in China, they're like, hey, if you're a man, you got to be a man. And there's these certain things like there's still a culture that they kind of live up to. Japan used to have that before their anime years. But for us, it's worse because we're like, if we had a social credit score system, being a transgender or doing some kind of, I don't want to use the words, but the doing some kind of libertine hedonistic thing will get you, some 5+ social credit score points. And
that's such a weird
being a
thing
conservative
like,
Christian
that's
who
like,
doesn't have...
It's like straight out of a sci-fi book.
It is! Kind of shit, dude, if anyone goes and fucking... Go watch like Soylent Green or something and tell me that it's...
people!
It's people! That's, oh my God, it's such a good movie. But like, just go watch that. Go, everyone. I was funny because I was saying this the last video. Like, just go watch like those 70 THX 1138. A clock, or not a Clockwork Orange, but fucking 2001: A Space Odyssey. Go watch those films. And actually, A Clockwork Orange is actually a good fucking movie to kind of get a good understanding of what hedonism and lack of spirituality does to a society.
But back to the point.
Sorry. Go ahead.
Because you and I will both go on a long tangent.
Especially
I'm
me. Yeah.
Notorious for that. People are. I guess people kind of are using mental illness as like spirituality replacement, and you see these kids on TikTok like watch me switch personalities live, and it's just man, it's destructive really because then if you call them ill, then you're destroying their spirituality pretty much,
right? Yeah,
and it offends them. But the problem is that like
you're committing a sin.
It's and the problem with mental illnesses like that, like multiple personalities, it's not really something you can prove.
Okay, please talk about that.
Because first of all, I mean, the human mind is just kind of complicated in general, but one of the telltale signs is amnesia.
Interesting. Yes.
Like people not really
like
knowing or remembering the things they do. Yeah, remembering the things they do when they're in a different personality. It's just such a hard thing for me to believe in because people will a lot of the time do things for attention. I think people pretending to have a disorder like that do have another problem.
Right, it's almost like a Munchausen's or syndrome, or like pretending you're sick.
Yeah, I mean, you did. Yeah, I mean, some sort of like hypochondria. Where, but they, if you think that's happening to you, or you're pretending that it is, there is obviously something missing from your identity.
Yes.
But another thing is that like how much of that has been pushed by psychologists themselves, because there have been psychologists in the past that have tried to make an impression on their patients to get reactions to their desire, and this goes into the Satanic Panic of like the 1980s, 1990s, where the whole thing was repressed memories, and people were thinking that their families were sexually abusing them and doing like satanic rituals on them in their youth.
Whoa.
Even though they hadn't.
Whoa.
They a lot of the time with the Satanic Panic, a lot of the time it was psychologists putting an impression on children, telling children that they had memories that they don't remember. And here's the thing with trauma and abuse and the nature of human memory. So I'll start with the nature of human memory. Yeah. It's not perfect. Photographic memory doesn't exist. I think it's bullshit. Because here's the thing with how memory works. We do not. First of all, anything we're looking at is not a raw input. Me looking at my computer screen right now, this is not a raw input. My brain on the subconscious level is taking all the little bits of light, putting together the information, and then making the best possible picture for my brain, for the conscious part of my brain to understand and to make conclusions on. You're not looking at raw data all the time. If you were looking at and analyzing raw data, your fucking mind would be overloaded.
Yeah.
On the conscious level.
There's so many things that are
subconsciously, right? Your brain is taking in all the stimuli and it's making up a picture for you. And the thing is that when we try to recall something, when we try to remember something, and I read a really good book on this called Subliminal. The ironic thing is that it was written by an astrophysicist with a psychologist, but what he says in it, I'll have to pull it out in a second to remember his name.
Yeah.
But what he says in it is pretty consistent along with what most people in the field of psychology agree with, is that human memory, whenever you're trying to recall something, your brain is drawing from your assumptions about what you think of the time, the people that were involved, and what happened, and it's putting together pretty much the gist. You remember the gist, and then your brain fills in the details afterwards to try and make a good picture of what happened. That's why we misremember things all the time. Nobody remembers things perfectly. It's just not possible. People misremember things all the time. There was a certain circumstance where a woman had gotten raped. Somebody had broken into her house and raped her. And they had lined up some suspects at the time that were in the local area that she had, and she was, trying to make a recognition of them. And there was a guy that looked almost exact. I mean, he looked really similar to the person that actually did it.
Oh God.
And she ended up having somebody wrongly convicted off of eyewitness testimony. She was 100% certain that he was the guy.
No.
The guy that did it ended up in the same prison as him.
Oh
and
my
was
gosh.
bragging about getting away with a crime and somebody else getting in the prison. And the guy that got convicted for this dude's crime was listening in on this, and because of that eventually got himself out of prison, and the other guy convicted probably after like years in prison.
Dude.
for being wrongly accused of raping someone. I'll have to pull that book out in a minute to get the author's
Subliminal.
name. It was in there, but it's called Subliminal. Really great read. But when you're traumatized, okay, the left hemisphere of your brain practically shuts down when you go into a traumatic state. Because what happens is one of the biggest things with trauma and PTSD is that when the traumatic event happens, one of the biggest telltale signs of going into a traumatic, like trauma-induced paralysis, is that you're helpless. You're completely helpless to stop anything. So your brain, as to kind of preserve itself, from being overwhelmed, essentially shuts down the left hemisphere. So they've done brain scans on trauma victims. They would bring back stimuli and put them back to this traumatic state with their permission, of course, to kind of do a brain scan or to monitor the brain waves. Left hemisphere shuts down, so your brain stops making logical sense of the situation and only makes emotional sense of the situation, which is why it is so emotionally harrowing for people, is because it's all just emotional stimuli, and they cannot make they literally are physically incapable of making logical sense of the traumatic event. And that's one of the problems with why they cannot get over it, because they cannot look back and make logical sense, but they can't stop thinking about it. That's the thing, is your brain pretty much then hardwires that moment, and you're emotionally frozen in time practically. And these people come detached from the people that they love. They come detached from reality. This is why you see like vets with PTSD, their families just fall apart. They become alcoholics so that they can stop feeling things. Because when you drink alcohol, it sort of slows down the processes in your right hemisphere. Your right hemisphere, the emotional parts of your brain kind of slow down a little bit, depending. And so that's why a lot of PTSD victims become alcoholics.
Wow. Because
the alcohol kind of helps them stop feeling like they're in this constant state of fight or flight. So the thing with repressed memories is she was this psychologist. Let me pull this up real quick, because I have.
Go ahead, take your time.
Her name, Michelle Smith. Michelle was she had ended up on quite a few talk shows, and her and Lawrence Pasadier, who was a fucking doctor, they were making impressions on children and people, telling them that they had repressed memories of trauma, which is not what happens when you're traumatized. But these people started believing, and then you have the entire country in a fucking mess
Wow.
over satanic ritual abuse on children and everything because people are believing this happens to them. And they are putting false memories in people's brains and pushing it out as science. And this makes a good point because Lawrence Pazder, he's an MD. He's a fucking doctor. He's got all the official credentials and everything, but he very much pushed a very popular form of pseudoscience and had families being torn apart and people being wrongly convicted of child abuse and shit.
Well, man, it fucking brings...
Officials are just as capable of pushing misinformation.
Wow. And especially when they get this... And
the thing is when they... Sorry.
No, it's cool. I interrupt all the time. It's like when they get this positive stimuli that they start seeing stars and they don't really... It's almost like they don't have any rationality anymore because they're just so focused on, well, I pushed this narrative and everyone seemed to like it and made me into like the doctor god. It's like you don't have to be intelligent anymore. It's like watching Bill Nye. He's a total midwit, but everyone worships him because he had a show 30 years ago. And
the funniest thing about Bill Nye is, as a kid, he was like one of the biggest reasons why I wanted to become a scientist, and now he's like totally sold out.
Isn't that crazy? I could not tell you how hard. I have a distinct memory. This is where my memory actually works. I had a distinct memory when I was, like maybe 7, 6, and we were in class watching Bill Nye videos on like a Friday or something. And man, dude, I was laughing my ass off. I mean, it was probably because it was like on that like Pee Wee Herman level of insanity. And I've always enjoyed that kind of like absurdist humor.
Yeah,
especially
very. Yeah, I would say very 90s show, especially with like those fisheye camera shots of Bill Nye's face when he's doing like
on the
shit.
ground with his...
It's so fucking 90s, dude.
Yeah, he did that well, and then he disappeared, and then he came back and became a midwit.
Yeah, he
and he just has a bachelor's degree too. So there you go. It's like he's trying to be this like Carl.
Like, you can.
And I will say,
sorry,
I'm not even gonna like. I literally, I will say until my grave, unless I go to college or whatever. But I'm a high school dropout, and I've learned all sorts of shit, and I don't really need, if you just read books and you know how to kind of deduce where people are bullshitting you, and I mean it just takes some level of common sense to actually learn things. You don't really need. I don't know, a degree other than the clout that you get from it, and it's not like you can't learn things in college, but it's just the knowledge is at your fingertips these days, and so
well, especially with the fact that we're in the information age right now, and that's a good time to transition into misinformation and how to identify bad research.
So
I have a list of pseudoscience identifiers that I'm practically pulling from the notes of my research methods class, because I feel like this should be knowledge that everybody knows so that they can kind of identify bad research practice, what a bad report is.
I love it.
So the first thing I want to get into is escape hatches and loopholes. So kind of like trying to immunize yourself from falsification. Basically having some sort of like ad hoc explanation behind every single refutation that happens against your claim. Like for example, when people try to take your peer review in terms of like identity disorders, and they call you a hypocrite or like or a bigot, right?
Yes. Yes.
Or like, for example, with astrology, which is very, very low hanging fruit, but this is just a really easy way to understand it. How they have all these different forms of science to explain your different personality traits when they differ from the original sign. Like, okay, I'm a Cancer. I was born in the latter end of June, but I have some. Let's say I have some personality traits that go along with Scorpio. Okay, well then I just have a Scorpio rising sign, or I have a or a fucking Libra Mercury, or a fucking what are the other ones, man? A Capricorn,
I'm
Jupiter
an
sign or whatever. You know what I
Aquarius.
mean? Like they have all these.
I'm
Yeah,
an
they have all
Aquarius,
these.
which
They have
means
like
I'm
all these
autistic.
backups.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's one of the best ways to understand it is having all of these kind of like little escape hatch backup plans to sort of immunize yourself from falsification. Be like, oh well, this is why you're having this different experience, or this is why you're acting differently. It's this other thing.
Too. Yeah.
You can't. That's one of the biggest identifiers for somebody that's just pushing bullshit on you.
Yeah. Well, actually, yeah, it always becomes that. It's like, it's I think, you know, I've got you know, I'm deaf. That's where like I was saying earlier, you must separate spirituality from the material world and trying to intertwine this shit to make your life more interesting, because you know you don't have any actual spiritual experience beyond like the shallowness of astrology. Then it's like maybe should maybe start understanding that separation, and you know, like Jung says, you kind of have to meet your soul and make a garden out of the desert that your soul is. And it's utterly separate. Yeah. And people really need to do, because it gets dangerous if you start saying, well, it's like how witch hunts ended up happening, you know, oh
my God. Yeah.
It's just, you can't intertwine these like spiritual absolutes that you believe in because it makes you feel nice, because at a certain point it's going to get dangerous and you're going to start using that over common sense. And you know, and we don't have to talk about this, but I've been thinking about it, is how masks are like lucky charms that ward away evil spirits, and the vaccine is like this potion, and you got to take it every 5 months or something to make sure that you keep those evil spirits away and keep the bad humors or whatever from it. It's like,
well, that's like the flu shot, man. I don't think I've ever gotten the flu shot. And
yes, and I have gotten
right.
the flu shot 2 or 3 times, and that's when I've gotten the flu. I've gotten the flu probably 3 or 4 times, but definitely 2 of them was me getting the flu shot, and then 1 or 2 months later, I got the flu. So I don't get those.
It's so easy to avoid like spreading the flu too. Like, most time when I got the flu, it's when I was in public school. You know.
Yes.
Because you know, kids just they're not very sanitary. You know, they're fucking rubbing their nose and wiping their fucking hands. But the next next point I want to get to is absence of self-correction. So your theory or your theory just doesn't evolve over time. You don't try to review it to sort of allow it to evolve. If a theory doesn't evolve, that's a bad sign. But people aren't, you know, if you're not trying to change it, that's a bad sign.
Yeah, if you're not, because as a scientist, as someone who ultimately your life is being dedicated to seeking truth, and getting that like as close to 99.9% as you can, you want it to be challenged. You want people to be shooting holes in it left and right. You know, that's when you're a good scientist, is when you can protect that.
Yeah, well, like for example, like a pretty good science, like the theory of relativity is constantly evolving, right?
Yeah.
Einstein's theory of relativity. Now, granted, a lot of relativity is some crazy sounding shit, but they are constantly trying to come up with different explanations, different ways to look at it mathematically. You know, it's a constantly evolving theory. Whereas you have, and I'm going to go back to zodiacs.
Yeah, go ahead. It's really easy. It's a good one.
It hasn't changed since the ancient Greeks.
Right.
The ancient Greeks had the same fucking thing that we look at, the same way we look at it now, pretty much.
Turned up my mic.
It hasn't really changed.
You know, I'll say something. The interesting thing about that was I actually went to a museum over in Houston, the Museum of Natural Science. I always loved that place. Went there with my family recently, and they had this like, you know, like one of those movies where it takes up the entire ceiling and it's fucking like super cool. And you just lay back and you watch it. And they were talking about how zodiac signs have shifted because of, you know, the place of the Earth, and how actually Aquarius, the real Aquarius, is like, I don't know, a couple months behind now. And so I'm actually a Pisces or something else. And so it's like, it doesn't even add up anymore. So
Yeah.
it's like, why even if you're going to believe in it, go do your research and go look at what it
Yeah.
actually
Like
is now.
I'm okay with, like, your regular everyday fucking white girl just having fun with it. For people that actually live by that shit, like,
Oh, dude,
it's
yeah,
kind of nuts.
it's voodoo juju. Yeah, it's mad. It's goofy. But yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah.
What were you saying? You were saying anything?
But a refusal to revise. So if a theory just or whoever creates the theory, if it just doesn't, if nobody makes an attempt to change it, if it just isn't evolving, there's probably something wrong with it. And then another thing I want to get into is
Yes.
emphasis on confirmation. So you're refusing to acknowledge conflicting data. If something hasn't been proven wrong yet, it must be 100% true. Versus, that's bullshit. It could be 100 things. Like, nobody's tried to prove it wrong, or if
it really reminds
so
me.
You
of
can't just take things for granted. So if it hasn't been proven wrong, if nobody's proven it wrong, then it must be good, right? Now, granted, if people have repeatedly tried to prove it wrong in a good, effective, and efficient manner, and they have been unable to kill a theory, then great. But you can't just 100% believe in something that just hasn't been proven wrong yet. You can't take everything that you see for fact.
Yeah. It reminds me of diets. Yeah. Like how it used to be fat is bad, and then we realized sugar is actually the menace. Stuff like that.
Right. And this goes back to proving your own theories wrong. Richard Feynman said that the essence of science is to bend over backwards and to prove oneself wrong. You have to try and kill your theories, because you can't just make assumptions about reality, especially when it comes to science, especially when it comes to medicine, because that is fucking dangerous when you try to build off of assumptions. Especially when people are data mining and p-hacking and fucking with data and stuff, because they do that all the time. Happens a lot. Like, for example, the guy that had that whole like trend where like dark chocolate was good for you and good for your health and made you lose weight.
Oh, dude. And
he
gave you diarrhea?
He was fucking with his data. Yeah. He was fucking with his data. He was only really looking at the affirming data that he was collecting. He was ignoring the people that were still gaining weight, that weren't being helped by, replacing regular chocolate with dark chocolate, yada yada. And he wasn't acknowledging kind of the other environmental aspects to these people's day-to-day eating habits. Dark chocolate makes no fucking difference in your diet. It's probably just as bad as regular chocolate.
Yes. It's a stimulant too, and is it a diuretic as well? I mean, because
I think on like a more minor level, it's not like coffee.
Yeah. Okay.
It's not like caffeine, which is like way more of a diuretic, but it is like partially a diuretic.
Ultimately, yeah, that's the thing. Yeah. I mean, if you've ever eaten a bunch of chocolates and had to have a terrible time in the restroom, you realize like that this is not giving me the nutrients that I need. I take all sorts of like vitamins every morning, and been doing that like the last few months. And I eat mainly beef and spinach and kale. It's not a strict diet, but it is like my main food. And I've actually lost I was 190 3-4 months ago, and now I'm at 172, and that's where I kind of like to be, 6'1". So
I'm the opposite. I'm like just trying to fucking gain weight.
Oh yeah. So you're one of those guys. Like, see, my metabolism is very much like I can gain weight if I want to. It's not too hard. So I kind of got to watch it. But actually, recently it's been a lot easier to be where I want, because when I just eat the beef and the spinach and throw some spice on it, blue cheese, I end up, I get full. I don't feel hungry. I don't feel the need to splurge. And then I just kind of...
Yeah, protein's filling.
It goes right through you, because you burn it. You just start burning all that. And so it's like, especially if you put a lot of butter on it, you get like that stimulant, because it just starts burning. And then it's like, it's not like when I've eaten like crap, and it's like, man, I'm not losing this fucking pizza weight that I gained days ago, Anyway, Is there other points you want to touch on in terms of
and emphasis on confirmation.
science being bullshit?
Psychics do this a lot.
Yes.
Like spiritual psychics do this a lot, where they try to take every small aspect of your life or things that you do and try to pin it to confirming their theories about you all the time. Psychics are psychics are horrible people a lot of time. They charge you ridiculous amounts to play with your emotions.
Yes.
And take advantage of, because a lot of time they take advantage of people that are in tough spots.
Yes.
Which is what a lot of bullshit scientists, especially in psychology, like to do. i.e., repress memories.
Yeah. Do you think there's any weight to the repressed memories thing?
What do you mean by elaborate?
When I went to college for like a semester, my psychology teacher literally talked about that, and like in terms of there are memories that your brain tries to push away so that it can like still function, and so you get those. Like everyone talks about that. Like, is that
there's a difference between repressing memories and dissociating. It's overblown. So like there's a difference between repressing memories and just flat out dissociating. Repressing memory would be, you would have to be in the situation and then your brain would have to just get rid of that memory.
Wow.
That just doesn't happen. But if you're dissociating within the moment, then obviously you're going to have a hard time remembering what's going on. And the brain does it sometimes dissociate as a mechanism, as a defense mechanism, especially for people that are repeatedly undergoing abuse.
Yes.
Sometimes they will eventually get used to it and just dissociate. But that's also a part of PTSD, is people are dissociative most of the time. And even though they've dissociated, even though they are dissociating, the traumatic event is still affecting them heavily.
So moving on to the other identifiers of pseudoscience.
The fourth one is a tendency to place a burden of proof on the skeptics. So let's say somebody's skeptical of you. I see this on the internet all the time. It's hilarious. When people try to make a claim and you're like, no, that's bullshit. And they're like, okay, well, how about you go get the information to disprove me? How about you make the effort to disprove my theory, disprove my thesis, and I'll just sit here and wait for you to do it. That's a horrible thing to do in science. That's like one of the biggest fucking indicators of a dipshit who's just sniffing his own farts. Is because you don't know how somebody got their data. You don't know what they did to their data.
Yes.
You don't know if they doctored it, if they changed it,
right?
If they filled holes. You don't know how somebody did their data, and so if somebody that's run a scientific study is doing that to you, that's a really big indicator of, okay, this guy's bullshitting me because he's relying on other people to disprove him. When you're a scientist, you need to be able to rely on yourself to disprove yourself. That's what a good scientist does.
Exactly.
So,
yeah. So it's like
tendency to place burden of proof on skeptics.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just yeah. I literally actually have the same thing with economics, where it's like when someone asks a question, I'm just like, well, I need to learn more about that if I don't know the answer. So it's like, I don't know. I can explore that, but I'll just say I don't know, and that's kind of. I think a lot of people it's really hard for them to say that.
People need to really just be self-aware and acknowledge when they don't know something.
Yeah. I think you see that a lot.
But
nowadays.
It's all kind of
a lot of fart sniffing.
People just worry about being lower on like the moral or political scale. I don't understand. Like people are so worried about looking like they don't know something, but it's like it's human to not know something.
Yes.
And it's more respectable for you to say that, maybe I should look more into this. I don't have enough information, than for you to just kind of make assumptions off of the little information you have and try to call the people idiots because you want so bad to be right and to look good.
Okay, so you wanted to also talk about misdiagnosis. And
I've got like here. I'm going to blast through these last few points on identifiers.
I'd love it.
Quite a few. So number 5, excessive reliance on anecdotes and testimony. Human experience and testimony is BS. You cannot rely entirely on that. And one of the biggest reasons is bias and like I said earlier, the nature of human memory, how we remember things, how we misremember things all the time, and
You want
one
recorded
of the biggest things we
tests.
do, especially with,
Sorry, did
say it
that?
one more time.
You want, especially nowadays, now that we literally have the technology to verify things, to record and give like an unbiased, unedited version of the truth.
Yeah, when making scientific claims, you definitely want data. You can't just take words. You can't just take somebody's testimony like, oh well, this is what I experienced, so this must be right.
Right.
Because that's going back to the mastectomies. That's literally what those doctors were saying. Is they were like, oh well, in my experience, it's helped some people, so it must work.
Right.
But
Yeah. Cope.
It didn't really fucking do anything.
Pseudoscientific cope.
Yeah, and you and this goes to like different forms of bias, like for example what's called the availability heuristic. So and this goes in with what people think of gun violence, how the media is constantly talking about bad things happening, and specifically gun violence. They're just constantly reporting on gun violence all the time. But what people don't realize is that even though we have access to more let's say efficient weaponry as the American people, like for example, in the 1910s, a normal citizen wouldn't have an AK-47, but now we can own AK-47s. The amount of gun crime is actually going down, even despite what we hear about like Detroit and Chicago.
I feel like it's reached the point of no return. Like you can't get more crime than what we kind of experienced, maybe in a bit in the 2010s. But like go back to 1990, they literally had Escape, or was Escape? I forget which movie it was, but you had a lot of even like you go back to watch movies from that era, and there's a lot of like references to the fact that there's a shit ton of crime. Like, what do we do about this? And it peaked out, I think, in 1990, late 80s, and then it just started dropping. But and it's like what's happened since. People own guns like crazy.
Yeah,
they passed constitutional carry here in Texas.
Yeah, and terrorism, including domestic terrorism, takes up only 0.3% of the deaths in the United States.
Yeah,
0.3.
Yeah, and
so it's like less than
1%. It's way less. I mean, it's been I feel like you go back to the 70s, and you got your Black Panthers. You had like the Covenants, the Sword, the Arm of the Lord, freaking like. Legit KKK, domestic terrorists, the Unabomber, all the. Or I probably should say that's a very no algo word. But you had a lot of just a lot of things to be afraid of. Serial killers, those have kind of disappeared, honestly.
Yeah, because of technology and how easy it is to catch people doing that kind of shit.
I out of curiosity, I like to think about how could I rob this place without being caught, or how could I do this without being caught? And it's like
oh wait, you can't.
Yeah. Oh wait, there's a camera there. Oh wait, it's like every little thing. It's very hard to do crime in a way that was very easy to get away with pre-surveillance and
Big Brother's watching.
Big Brother's watching. Even little brother who owns a jewelry shop, he's watching you. He's got his guns. He's got his guns in the back. So try to rob him.
Yeah. But the availability is heuristic. So pretty much you see something all the time being reported on, which makes it seem like it's happening way more than it actually is. Like, for example, they ran a study. They ran a study going through Google search statistics. The news, when they were reporting on like medical disorders and stuff, reports a lot more on cancer than it does on heart disease. And people are a lot more worried about cancer than they are heart disease. But as an American, especially, you are far, far, far more likely to have heart disease and die from it than you are to contract cancer and die from cancer. And more people actually that get cancer survive cancer than people that get heart disease. You're not really going to survive heart disease.
No, and you're not going to. Yeah, I mean, I hate to get into that, man, but it's like I remember recently looked at the top, the countries ordered by obesity. And if you just the top 10 are all island nations, Pacific Islander nations. You take those out, we're number 2, right behind Kuwait, believe it or not. So
wow.
it's something that, especially even nowadays with certain health crises, it's still like you can't even like point out that obesity is legitimately, like, I know people in my life who are dying from obesity, and I can't like, you can't tell them anything different. They either accept it in this nihilistic sense, or they just cope. You know, they take their pills or whatever, and it's like, I don't want to be taking pills. I take vitamins, whatever. I hope that extends my life. That's why I kind of take them. But I would never want to take some fucking weird big pharma opiate or some shit that messes with my blood or whatever to stay alive.
Oh man, and opiates. We all know about fucking opiates.
Dude,
and especially being Floridian, we had the pill pushers going on for a while, and
Yes.
God, there were people coming into my school constantly talking about painkillers and pill pushers and shit like that. It was a very common thing. Our drug lectures in Florida schools were rarely ever about heroin or marijuana or anything like that being a gateway drug. A lot of the time, it was about pills and opiates. And they were constantly coming in, having us in these big assemblies, talking to us about kids that die from taking opiates, and people that die from taking opiates. It was, in the state of Florida, the opiate crisis was pretty bad. I think it's gone down since then. I think one of the bigger issues with opiates is in like the Midwest or like Virginia or something like that.
Ohio, West Virginia, Kentucky.
Yeah.
Oh,
West
dude.
Virginia.
Mountain Mama.
But number 6, refusal to use scientific method, or claiming that the scientific method is inefficient. I'm sorry if you're claiming the scientific method is inefficient, you're not really a scientist.
That's some real fucking gaslighting, that's for sure.
Yeah,
but it's true. There are people who it's like, oh, this is inefficient because, well, they'll use the words that absolve them of any wrongdoing, which is, oh, it's just racist to do that, so do my thing. You know?
Yeah, or simply just saying, oh, it's common sense. Why would I need to test it? Common sense goes back. It goes back to human experience, availability, heuristic, and bias. Our daily experience of reality is not. It can't apply to the rest of the world. It just can't.
Yes.
Realistically, we assume that we're more aware and intelligent than we really are as human beings. But we're as human beings, we get kind of cocky and narcissistic almost in our ability to make assumptions about the world. But 9 times out of 10, human beings are not able to draw conclusions from experience that are accurate. It just doesn't happen. That's like the amount of times that I see people on the internet going like, oh, women are cheating all the time. Oh, but men cheat all the time. They're constantly arguing about that. It's like, well, that's probably your personal experience because you don't have
and that's dangerous. I mean, if you look at the statistic, if you look at statistics, men do cheat more. But if you live in this MGTOW world, you'll be like, well, women are just they just don't freaking like it's really easy to freaking use your own experience, which is where empiricism
a lot of the time if your own experience is undesirable,
especially
and is making you see the world
such
a dark,
it's not like
depressing way. It's your environment. It's the information that you're exposing yourself to. It's the people that you're exposing yourself to. Exactly. A lot of the time, people just need to change the environment and absorption of information. Like they were running studies where they would take people's Facebook feeds and they would feed a certain amount of people more positive information, a certain amount of people more negative information, and then they had a control group because, and that's another big thing when you're doing a scientific experiment. If somebody doesn't have a control group, it's a bad. If you do not see a control group within the data, completely disregard that study.
Yes, sir.
Completely disregard that study if they don't have a control group. But they had a control group where they didn't change anybody's news feeds, and they found that the people that were getting more positive information on a day-to-day basis were they were posting more positive things. They exhibited. Now, granted, there could have been confounding factors, and I'll get into confounds a little bit in a second here. There could have been confounding factors, being, they were just having a better week, a better month. They had good things happening to them outside of what was happening on their news feed. But nonetheless, what they found is that the people that had a more positive news feed versus the people that had a more negative one. Overall, they were a lot more positive, and the people that had a negative news feed they posted a lot more negative things and exhibited the behaviors of somebody that was a lot more angry in their day-to-day life. And if people, especially people that run like, a lot of the the crazy end of liberal politics, where they think the entire world is out to get them, the entire world is racist, the entire world is sexist, the whole world's falling apart. They're just absorbing too much of that information. They forget about the times where people aren't like that. You'll find that most people in life aren't pieces of shit. Most people that I come across aren't racist or homophobic or whatever. Most people they don't care. They're pretty accepting. They're like, whatever, do what you want with your life.
Yeah, it's
most people do not give a shit.
You're spot on. Yeah, most. I mean,
but then again, that's my personal experience. So.
Oh, isn't that funny? Yeah, that really is a big thing. Your vibe attracts your tribe, but also your tribe begets your vibe. So it's like you gotta. I forgot who said. I think it was just Jim Rogers, or I forgot who it was. Some really big smart investor guy. He said, you are the average of the 5 people that you surround yourself by. So if you surround yourself with a bunch of internet white nationalists or, whatever BLM Black Panther types, you're going to be surrounded with information that makes you feel like you're this persecuted individual and everyone hates you.
Yeah.
But if you go to church or you go see your family and you talk with your grandma, and you see your, your nephews and nieces and cousins, and if you just talk to people day by day, most people are going to be somewhere in the middle or towards good, especially if you're in I would say like a small town, or I guess it's my own bias, but it's like if you constantly are surrounded by it's like a feedback loop of just evil until you go insane.
Yeah.
So you got
and that's the thing. Is a lot of people create echo chambers for themselves, and you have to surround your people that.
Well, you know what else too?
People that sometimes
another good piece of advice that I got from Curtis Yarvin's article on kind of he talked about a relationship he had, and he was saying how if you if what you need to do, especially if you're young, is get yourself in as many circles as possible. Spread your proverbial intellectual seed in your own mind, and because it challenges your brain constantly to understand new people, and so you build this confidence. Yeah,
being able to surround yourself with people with different opinions that's the spice of life. I think variety is the spice of life.
Yes.
Granted, if you shouldn't surround yourself with people that are like literally saying you should kill a certain group of people or like disenfranchise a certain group of people,
exactly,
because they're fucking insane. But like people, like moderate people that will disagree on some things, that will challenge you, and you can get to good debates with your friends, and you can't create an echo chamber for yourself, because then you're just going to go nuts.
And also think about what happens when too many people start joining that group of unhealthy insanity. You get times like the years of lead in Italy, or the Irish Troubles, where there's a giant section of the population that is actually insane, and like in this mass hysteria, we need to take out the Brits, we need to take out the commies or the fascies.
For the Red Scare.
It's mass hysteria is a scary thing. You don't even know when it's happening until you're either the victim of it or you're a part of it, and you're waking up to it. So that's something very important that scientists should live up to, is noticing that bullshit and not letting their ego get to them.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is that some scientists, because you gotta look past the official credentials and see the person, and that's for all officials in life. People, like, for example, I mean, the whole thing with police officers and stuff. Like, I for one, I'm somebody who gets kind of uncomfortable around cops sometimes, but that's just kind of normal.
Yes.
But I also understand that not all are going to be somebody that just wants to fucking ruin my life. You know what I mean? We have to understand that sometimes people are attracted to the profession because they're already someone that's kind of narcissistic and wants power.
Yeah, to some extent.
Same thing with politicians.
Yeah. I'd say, yeah. And that's what normally your average typical midwit or even average IQ below average, when they have that like hint of like, I want to be a hero, there is that sense of like, I'm ordained to be a hero. And so there is a level of narcissism, but, right. Like I'll say from my experience, I've had one experience with cops that I was like, this is weird. But that's a long story. But ultimately, I've had a lot of experiences where like a cop could have totally put the handcuffs on me and said, "Oh, you're in trouble. You're possession and driving while high on the Mary Jane." I've had like 2 or 3 incidents like that, and I've always been let off. And you could just say white privilege, but I could also say I've literally had Mexicans with me. Well, like, why didn't they get in trouble? Or why is it that I've known Mexicans who have had good experiences with cops? And it just comes down to this, like, okay, well, just look at the statistics, and it doesn't really benefit. It doesn't really benefit anyone. Cops do kill people, but also it's not this insane scourge. It's just looking at things through that political lens and using your own personal experience. Yeah, it's fucking stupid.
And the media and availability.
And using CNN and MSNBC as your, or even Fox News as your thing to say, well, I saw on MSNBC yesterday. It's like, go back to the 1980s in Romania or Yugoslavia and tell me, well, I saw on the state news yesterday that they were saying the U.S. is putting Colorado bugs in our farms and killing our crops.
Yeah, crazy shit like that. It was like the 5G people too, information from fucking crazy ass sites, and that's another thing. Like promoters of alt medicine is another one, and refusal for scientific method. Now there is some alt medicine that works, especially like herbal kinds for certain ailments. But then you get the people that think like essential oils are going to help with like their kids or something like that. It's treatment that's tailor made and can't really be tested on a larger scale.
Say that again, because I interrupted you.
Oh, which part?
What was it?
Oh, so promoters of alt medicine, and there is some alt medicine, that probably works in certain minor circumstances. But then you have those women and probably sometimes men. You have those parents that think like essential oils are going to help with their kids' autism.
Yeah,
that vaccines cause autism.
Yes.
They get their information from crazy places, and if especially if a treatment is very specifically tailor made, in terms of like I don't want to explain this. Well, but it's something that can't really be tested on a large scale.
Yeah, that's the thing.
Apply to more people.
Like the nowadays it's interesting seeing how liberals have become the kind of easiest target for pseudoscience when it comes like, oh, if it's coming from the news or it's coming from some governmental organization, therefore it's true. But you go back just 10 years, conservatives would be like, I saw this picture on the internet of they found a giant, which means that proves the story in the Bible. From my own spiritual Christian perspective, proving stories in the Bible is completely. That's not the important part. It's about learning from those stories and understanding they have origins in history that probably did happen. But going out and saying, well, they went to Israel, they found a giant there, which means that those the Nephilim. The Nephilims actually exist and stuff or something. I don't know, but yeah. And they try to use this weird, like, bullshit scientific point of view to prove something that is just so clearly goofy. And I think the vaccines from back in the day, when you had the giant anti-vax from, I think her name was Jenny McCarthy, who was like the big proponent of it. She was Jim Carrey's wife. they and Jim Carrey was a part of it because he's well, my wife is saying it, so I'm just gonna run along with it. And he's also crazy, but it's like I would go on Facebook, back in the early days when I was like 13, and like make fun of these fucking anti-vaxxers because it's like it would just be this. Oh, here's this website 911truth.com. They were talking about it. And it's just it's just like, oh, okay, have fun with that. Because ultimately the rhetoric is it doesn't matter if the person who's making the bullshit actually believes it. The way the way they try to prove it has no foundation in studies or whatever. It's just like they went there and they did this, and it's normally just some kind of like it feeds this part of their bias that already exists, like whether it be this fundamentalist Christian type point of view where it's like I need to scientifically prove the entire Bible type, the apologetics, those people, it feeds into that bias, like, oh, here's this thing and it connects to that, and therefore all this is bullshit. And it's like that I've seen that my entire life from all political spiritual spectrums.
Well, the thing that people forget about, like religious doctrine sometimes, is that a lot of it is meant to be taken figuratively as a sort of lesson to learn.
Well, you know what else? People forget what the hell faith is. I have faith in these stories because when I have faith, I don't care how many times you say the Bible is bullshit or how many times some person tries to prove a story. It doesn't matter to me. The stories matter, and there's a reason that they have been carried on for more than longer than the Bible existed. These stories have a foundation in the story of man. And so it's like, why would I give a shit, man? Go fuck yourself if you want to come at me with this.
I mean, because the Bible does draw from other places, but then that kind of just tells you
there's connections everywhere. So it's like, and that's where it always comes back to faith and this spirituality that it has I've been using this phrase a lot lately, but it's useful. It has a je ne sais quoi to it. It has like, I can't explain it, but there's a reason that we believe this, and there's a reason we have faith.
Yeah,
people don't have faith anymore. People don't have faith or any kind of spiritual faith because they want to constantly like bring the materialism aspect into it.
Yeah, and as somebody that's not really religious, like I can even understand that from an outside perspective.
Right?
Like, that makes sense.
And I know that you have a much more what's the word? What do you call it? You have a non-shallow way of seeing spirituality and having gone, I think, on the same journey that I have. And a lot of young people in our age group, I respect where you're coming from, and I think what the journey you're on is very important. So everyone has their own journey, and I don't want to like destroy someone's, because I don't know what it's your own journey to faith. It's your own journey to supreme meaning, as Carl Jung called it. Why would I want to destroy that? That's better than the fucking world that we've all been brought up in, which is this hyper materialist. Only thing that brings you happiness is a good job and a TV and fucking pork cracklings. And I don't live in that world, and I grew up in it, and I fucking I hate it. It's like everyone hates it. That's why I think there's going to be a move back to religion and discovering that supreme meaning that the boomers
in a certain way, But to move forward,
yes, go ahead.
So evasion of scrutiny. So kind of demonizing people that try to do peer review, and you and I talked about this a couple times. How people just kind of demonize people doing peer review, like you're not a believer, you're bigoted, you're a hypocrite, kind of thing. Saying that it's an unfair evaluation of your research, an unfair evaluation of your theory.
Yes.
Publishing to journals that don't require peer review.
Yes.
Big one. And I mentioned this earlier. Some guys can literally just pay a fee of a few $100s to some journalism company, and there you go. Their research is out in the open. You really want to look toward peer review articles, even things like pop psychology magazines are bullshit a lot of the time.
Wow.
popsci is just a fucking mess.
That's crazy.
A lot
So
of
it's
time
like,
it deals
so
with,
it's
like,
like when
really
you see those
dumb
headlines
shit.
from some kind of like medium tier website that people know but don't really care for, you'll see like a headline that says "Study proves that actually this," and people will be like, "Oh, hey,
Yeah.
article, let's paste that. Oh, everyone look at my article
Yeah.
because it says this. It has a
Yeah.
headline."
When it comes to science, when it comes to psychological study, you have to look at the way that they've done the research, at the data itself.
The methodology behind it, and people never look at methodology.
Yeah, you need to look at methodology. And critical incident stress debriefing, they call it, or CISD for short. They were doing this around 9/11, or after 9/11 rather, and they were using this on because what this is like when a critical traumatic incident happens and affects a large group of people simultaneously, they get this group together and they try to find a way to get them to talk about it, or expose them to stimuli together to get them to kind of overcome it together. And when it came to these 9/11 victims, or people that experienced 9/11, firsthand, a lot of the time it made their trauma worse. They weren't really helping a lot of these people that had experienced 9/11 firsthand. The critical incident stress debriefing that they were going through was sort of just making them relive it over and over again. But the people that were behind it, they meant well. They wanted to help these people, but they were so dead set on being right and on seeming like good scientists and getting those big science brownie points, that they just kept doing it, and they were avoiding scrutiny, and they were saying anybody that peer reviewed their methods or scrutinized them were all hypocrites, and that they were all just giving them unfair evaluation. And so if somebody's trying to avoid scrutiny like that, huge red flag. Another one. Number 8 being absence of connectivity. So which is really just failure to build on existing scientific knowledge. So if you're just ignoring previous scientific law that's been made, and it relates to your study, and you're just ignoring the previous knowledge that's already been there and operating as if it didn't exist, that's another sign of a bad study. Use of impressive sounding jargon. Number 9. I love jargon in terms of it's fucking hilarious.
Yes.
Have you ever seen the skit? It's the skit called Technical Jargon Overload.
Yes, my brother sent me that. The random engineering terms just kept on going.
I do not know how that guy kept a straight face reading that.
Yeah, that was pretty amazing. I love that fucking video.
But it's kind of like whenever like TV shows try to have hackers, and they're constantly saying techie bullshit, or they're or they have like a scientist like in the CW Flash, how what's his name is constantly talking about like quantum something, quantum this.
Yeah, throw quantum in there.
If people are just trying. Yeah, people are trying to sound good, but the words that they're saying just aren't meaning anything really.
Yeah,
it's just kind of like just smart word jumble.
Well, it's like
word salad.
It becomes like a sales pitch at a certain point where none of it makes any sense, but it's just
pretty much. It's like you're trying to sound good to somebody. You're pretty much trying to sell something at that point.
Yeah.
And an absence of boundary conditions going in with that. So. Failure to specify settings under which your claims do not hold. So, like, if your theory tries to apply to and fix everything, and you don't kind of underline the limits to which it does not work, that's a big red flag, especially in psychology. Because a lot of the time in psychology, a certain kind of treatment is not going to work for everybody.
Yeah,
certain kinds of treatments don't work for anybody. They will work for certain kinds of people, but they will not work for everyone. And if you have somebody who's trying to come up with something that applies to everything, huge red flag. Probably can't trust that guy. And the last one I want to go over is or if you have something to say real quick before I move on.
That actually reminds me of like there's a lot of really good like sort of, I don't know what you'd call them, like libertarian types who aren't just the stupid, big L libertarian party types who just espouse, very like surface level, oh, weed should be legal and prisons are bad or whatever types. But like you get your George Gammons who are just extremely intelligent, know a lot about economics, know how to have. I've learned a lot about central banking and economics from him. But even for him, I think he has this really hard, and he's a Christian, so he's not like he doesn't live in this hedonistic, libertine world, but he doesn't know how to answer some of these, like, how do we protect ultimately American jobs? How do we stop cities from collapsing in on themselves? And he's just like, well, it's all because socialism is bad. And it's like, yeah, but there's certain types of failures of an absolute free, no borders world that just doesn't work, and you're going to be coerced, and you need to have some level of government, and you need to have some level of patriotism. And I think he's kind of getting to that, and he's showing some signs of understanding that. But these people, and nowadays, it's especially when it comes to if you're an ideological person in terms of like, I think the government should be structured this way and the financial system should be structured this way. Take into account that when people do that, when they try to have their utopia, every single time it fails. And so you have to be very, very receptive, especially to a technologically advanced world where certain things like, are we really going to have this libertarian society where, whoever can bid the highest gets what they want? Well, okay, in a time of a winter storm, sure, you're going to have a lot more communitarianism and people helping each other in a libertarian society, but you're also going to have a lot of places where they are kind of morally defunct. And the grandmas who live there who are alone or something won't be able to get the heater that they need to warm their house because some guy down the street is able to buy them all and sell them at a higher price or some shit, because or they just literally are sold out because they can just bid high. It's like, well, there should be some level of not price control, but you need control and some king, some leadership that has some level of absolute power and rhetorical power to say, that's fucked up, give that grandma the heater that she needs to stay alive. And so this idea that we can just have an absolute answer to anything, especially when it encompasses everything, it's like you're probably in a cult if you're thinking like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very, very cultic way of thinking.
Yes.
The last one I want to go over is appealing to false authority, emotion, or sentiment. So, like, makes you feel good, it must be true.
Yes.
Or, when somebody's ignoring fact over feelings, and of course, the facts don't care about your feelings, liberal.
It's always going to be, dude. Everyone,
when people are confronted with inconvenient facts, their whole thing is like, scientists don't know everything, or you don't know everything. You can't argue with me because you don't know everything. Kind of,
that's a fallacy.
Which I guess kind of ties into what was it? Kind of ties into evasion of scrutiny a little bit. But it's a pretty big fallacy.
Just
appealing to false authority.
Yeah. There's gonna be, I see a lot of that coming down the pipe with how little people trust any form of authority at this point, and it's like that. That ultimately leads.
And it's kind of hard to.
Yeah, it is hard. Like I
in a spiral.
Yeah, I didn't get the coof medicine, and I won't ever. And I think increasingly more people just aren't. Yeah, they're not going to get they won't get it like every 5 months, and I just feel like, I'm untrustworthy, but it's just because I don't know. I've read 1984. I've read Brave New World.
And the world is starting to get kind of too similar to those kinds of,
and it might just be genetic too. All my ancestors were like fleeing some kind of empire evil, or they were. Or they were fighting they're fighting in the Civil War. My ancestors fought in the Revolution. It's like, I don't know. There's just a part of me that I'm never going to trust some lame duck bullshit government that tries to make me do something that doesn't have any backing to it. And the
biggest thing with that kind of distrust is that past all of the official credentials, they're human beings.
Yeah.
You know, you don't just trust any guy on the side of the road. Why would you blindly trust
Yeah.
any
And
other
it, that
person, even if
that'll
they look
yeah.
good?
I see some rise to like I remember I was talking with a friend about how like cults are probably going to start becoming more of a thing in times like this because there's just so little trust that people will look up to some
Yeah,
charismatic smart dude who says the right words and yeah.
you can't. Well, I mean, that's how Hitler came to rise, pretty much. Is that
Yes.
they didn't have any leaders, and this guy that was,
And no one liked them. Yeah,
saying
they
some
were
shit
like
that
everyone.
appealed well to them.
Yeah, it was really easy for them to look up to a guy who also was
They
he was
were
a
very
homeless dude.
impressionable.
Yeah, homeless dude, very left to the side, and so they're like, this dude knows what we've been through, and then everyone thinks we're evil assholes. Well, how about we show them? How about we show them what we're made of? And it's exactly what I mean. That's no one really talks about it, but it's like Napoleon was the same exact person.
Mm-hmm.
Napoleon was the Hitler of the early 1800s. No one ever talked. He was probably worse. He was, and then you just go back to Attila the Hun. Well, when even every giant like empirical
Genghis
leader
Khan.
like that, Genghis Khan. And there are things to you could admire about them, but they're so far back that you're allowed to admire them. And also, they didn't have insane, crazy ideologies like Hitler did. But ultimately, they were in the same boat, like especially with Napoleon, where it's he was basically like he was a genius militarily, but in terms of his like own state ideology, he was just all about himself and all about the French race and whatnot, and he was going to impose his own empire on all of Europe. That was his idea. It's like that's a Hitler. And even before him with Robespierre and shit, it's like these and Robespierre was quite literally a cult leader ruling over France until they cut his head off, and it's just that's a very dangerous thing that we need to be hyper aware of in times like this. Is
but
not to
that's
trust
the thing
man.
though. Is people don't understand that leaders like that they exist separate from morality. Like people from different moralities can be capable of those things. It's
Interesting.
It's not about whether or not like for example, from anybody on any side of the political spectrum in America could be capable of pushing their own ideology on other people in the same way that, for instance, people like Napoleon or Hitler did. If it were to get to a bad enough point to where we were leaderless and then somebody ended up rising to power, like in those times, or like during the Soviet Revolution.
Vacuum of power. Yeah.
And that's the thing. People won't believe that their favorite person would do something like that, or that they would be just as bad. But that's the problem. That's the problem that's gone on throughout history, and why humanity keeps repeating the same cycle in terms of that is because they think that they're special and that they're going to be better and they're going to be different.
Right, it's different this time. That's always
it's not going to be different this time. You're going to do the same thing.
Ultimately,
but I want to just
go ahead.
I just want to reread over just the main like titles of this, just to kind of list them off, and then we can kind of move on.
Yeah.
So your big identifiers of pseudoscience. You got escape hatches and loopholes, absence of self-correction, an emphasis on confirmation, ignoring any sort of alternative explanations, tendency to place the burden of proof on skeptics, an excessive reliance on anecdotes and testimony, refusal to use a scientific method or assuming that the scientific method would be inefficient, evasion of scrutiny, absence of connectivity or a failure to build on existing scientific knowledge, use of impressive sounding jargon, and also an absence of boundary conditions on top of that, and appealing to false authority, emotion, sentiment, or distrust of fact.
Beautiful.
So if you're looking at a study or a report that has any or multiple of those, you should really start to look at it in a way that's like, okay, this might not be totally correct.
And there's a really good interview I recommend with one of the co-founders of Wikipedia, and he talks about how Wikipedia has become kind of like a here and there bullshit source because there's a political motive behind all of it. But actually, to add to your list, I recommend going to Wikipedia and typing in list of fallacies and just read up on that and understand and start seeing it. Don't be an autistic Redditor and be like, well, that's just be aware. Be aware of like when someone's trying to coerce you and how to get out of that situation, especially if you're you need to know when you're being fucking bullshitted.
Especially in the current information age and the materialistic world we live in, people are constantly trying to coerce online. They're constantly trying to push a certain idea or product on you.
Yes.
So that they can either be famous, so that they can have money, they can be a sort of influencer, or so that if they're a scientist, so that they can just get their Nobel Prize. And speaking of Nobel Prizes, this is a good time to transition. The guy, let me. Here we go. Prefrontal lobotomies. Okay. So Antonio Manes, he shared a Nobel Prize in physiology or medicine, okay, for prefrontal lobotomy. And pretty much they would use the prefrontal lobotomy to quote unquote treat people with, more popularly, schizophrenia or even depression. And I just want you to think about how widely spread depression is right now.
Yes, most Americans.
How often people are diagnosed with it.
Yes.
And imagine how many people would be getting prefrontal lobotomies right now if we did not challenge the idea of prefrontal lobotomies. And pretty much, for anybody that doesn't know what a prefrontal lobotomy is that's pretty much they're severing your prefrontal cortex with the rest of the brain, and your prefrontal cortex is you essentially. And I had your prefrontal, your frontal lobe, pretty much prefrontal cortex is pretty much it's responsible for your personality, for your behavior, your emotions, for your self-awareness. So because somebody would have depression or schizophrenia, they would essentially cut off their self-awareness and turn them into a zombie as a form of treatment. And here's one thing we need to look at when it comes to people trying to come up with medical practices and stuff is we need to look at how they're applying something, when they're applying it, what they are applying it for, and whether or not it is the proper way to fix the problem. Because obviously, because somebody's depressed, cutting off their prefrontal cortex is not a way you fix the problem. Sure, they're not going to be depressed anymore, but that's because they practically don't exist anymore as a sentient human being.
Damn.
You need to look at he won a Nobel Prize for that shit.
Right, and at that time they would have been like, wow, this guy fixed it all. What a great guy.
Yeah, he came up with it in 1949, and by the end of the 1950s, up to 50,000 lobotomies were performed.
Dude.
Up to 50 fucking thousand people had their fucking brains cut off. Pretty much. Because they thought, oh, well, this definitely is a treatment for psychotic individuals. They're not psychotic anymore. They're just lumbering around.
Right. And there are people who have psychotic
what we need to realize is that and what a lot of the time what medical officials and people within the pharmaceutical field are trying to do is trying to make money and sell you a product or service. Now, not to say that some medicine or a lot of medicine doesn't work, but what the problem is that if whether or not they're applying it correctly, because they over apply depression meds and SSRIs to children at this point,
dude.
And that's a horrible idea.
Yeah,
when it comes to young children.
I saw it a lot when I was a kid, man. Yeah.
I've got the statistics pulled up for this somewhere. I have so many fucking tabs open right now.
Like a kid going through like basic.
So
just
first of all,
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so 12.7% of the U.S. population over the age of 12 take antidepressant medication at this point.
What was that? What percentage was that?
And there's been a 12.7%, so almost 13% of the U.S. population at about the age of 12 started taking antidepressants.
Jesus.
The increase in the percentage of people using antidepressants between the 90s and 2014 is like a 64% increase. And specifically in children, where's this at? Okay. And I'm just going to rip this straight from, this is,
yeah, go right ahead.
I think this is an APA website. No, this is the U.S. National Library of Medicine.
Okay.
I'm taking this pretty much straight from their website. The move from tricyclic antidepressants to SSRI in the 90s was accompanied by a substantial increased use of SSRIs. So antidepressant prescriptions increased to children increased threefold to tenfold from the 1980s to the 1990s, and in Canada it increased 80% from 97 to 2003 in children. Okay, and here's the thing with antidepressants. It pretty much slows down your brain. Okay, and they're giving this to children during their
most formative,
very
years.
critical cognitive developmental years. Exactly. And what antidepressants and SSRIs do to children is that it takes down their level of curiosity and involvement. And some antidepressants even cause suicidal ideation. They do the opposite of the effect that's intended.
Wow.
It's some kids, into their adolescence would have suicidal ideation because the antidepressants are being pushed on them.
It literally makes them into little nihilists.
And the most important thing and the most important thing for a child is for them to be curious, for them to want to learn things.
Yes.
I'm having to fix my headphones real quick. There we go. Because when you're young, you're constantly taking in new stimuli. Your brain is constantly creating new schema on every single thing that you come across, that you see, that you hear, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So when you bring down a child's when you bring down a child's level of curiosity, you're essentially dumbing them down. They don't want to ask questions. They don't want to experience new things. And then what does that do to them well into their adulthood? They're practically useful zombies at that point.
Yep. Wow.
They live well into their lives being zombified by these antidepressants. And antidepressants by 2017, I wanted to say, started making $17 billion fucking dollars for the pharmaceutical industry. I want you to think about that. $17 billion off of antidepressants alone. And antidepressants and SSRIs are making that much fucking money.
So let's just think about that. How there is an entire industry that's basically state backed. Like the government acts as salesmen and they root for this industry. They root for the healthcare and insurance monopolies or oligopolies, and they make money.
Yeah.
They have cash flow from killing essentially our communities, the development of our children, and especially our healthy diets and getting exercise, because they inevitably have more relevance and this goes back. I always bring this the fuck up. This is an important thing to understand and think about this all the time when you look at how broken the world is the broken window fallacy. The broken window fallacy is, we can just keep breaking this window and fixing it, and we have a real economy. No, you don't. That's why China's falling apart, because they keep doing that. They keep just building crap that does. Japan has been in a depression for 30 years because they keep doing the same thing, just building crap that doesn't matter. And what we are now at this point is most people believe like happiness is just having a bullshit, back to the bullshit economy that we all talk, even liberals will talk about this, the bullshit economy, where they becoming a useful idiot and a zombie and taking your meds and eating like shit benefits these people in power who ultimately want to keep breaking the window, which is your body and your mind and your soul.
Yeah. And I learned extensively about the broken window theory, and essentially the TLDR of it is, let's say you have a car sitting in the middle of this neighborhood. Okay. Yes. Perfectly fine car, nothing really going on around it. Nothing's going on. Okay, you break the window. Okay, now it's got a broken window. So now let's say you have a ton of kids kind of crowding around the car. They hang around the car. Obviously, nobody cares about this car, so why would they care what they do to it? So they break more windows, and then they start breaking the windows of the house next to the car, because obviously nobody cares about what's going on with this car, what's going on around it. Or let's say you're at a park and somebody's just letting their dog shit in the middle of the sidewalk and not picking it up. Well, everybody else with the dog there is going to let their dog shit on the sidewalk, and then there's just going to be shit all over the place because of broken window theory, because obviously nobody cares, so whatever. So if you have an entire society like that, then obviously, the government
everything
would just keep breaking
divorce.
the fucking window.
Yes, you are maintained. So what? And then,
Or not even just the government, but corporations.
yes, you start getting this feedback loop, perpetuating where and what's his name? John Michael Greer talks about. I've been bringing him up a lot. His very important essay is his how civilizations collapse. He talks about how at a certain point the capital that's produced cannot be maintained, and so we now live in this world where that exact thing is happening, and it's encouraged. Where let's keep building. I remember Prudentialist brought this up, how like 25% of new construction is Dollar Generals, and right, and you go, dude. I recommend this. Go on Wikipedia, and you know how you can like when you go like tallest building in the world, you can go back to the last one that was the tallest building. If you go back to the early 1900s, it was almost like every fucking month, dude, that America was building a new beautiful tall building in Chicago or New York, and it was constant. There was this like drive and innovation in this nation that was what was the complete opposite of the broken window, where it's like, hey, that guy over there, he built a tall ass, but I'm going to go put a spire on top of mine, so it's taller than it is.
Broken window can work the opposite way. It really can.
Yes, and it's worked. Yeah, well, now the innovation isn't building a giant skyscraper. It's and you know, you can say they're not like China has banned certain skyscraper like over a certain height because if they do, they build things shittily and it's going to fall at some point. But they did that because, yeah, I mean, it can be dangerous. But when you look at like the opposite, well, we're just on the other side of the spectrum now, where it's like it's the absolute malaise, where it's like, we'll just build another strip mall and hopefully the fat idiots go in and buy more burgers.
That's pretty much. Yeah. The innovation's kind of going down, and
to get back to what you were saying.
Yeah, but that goes back to how children's curiosity is completely destroyed.
Yes, and what I mean, yeah,
it's antidepressants.
Yeah, it's the death of spirituality.
Now, when you're an adult, yeah, when you're an adult, you know, taking antidepressants and SSRIs, that I mean, you've already developed. You're fine. Mm-hmm. You know, if that's what you need to have less anxiety, less depression, then great. You know, for some people that works great. But
especially
in children, that is their
medicine.
Developmental stages. Yeah, especially when it comes to schizophrenics and antipsychotics.
Mm-hmm.
But what we need to understand is the environment surrounding the person. We have to understand causality and what is causing people to be depressed, because depression is pretty normal for a human being to experience. It just depends on how the depression manifests and how it affects the person. Right. So everybody gets depressed. You know, you have a close family member or friend that dies. You know, you get depressed, or you know, just something inconveniences you, and you've had a tough week and you just feel like shit. The difference is, let's say you have a tough week, but then that tough week ruins your entire fucking year.
Yeah.
I mean, month after month, you're just stuck in a spiral. The whole point of and hold on, I'm trying to remember the exact term for this. It's
well, you know, like Jordan Peterson,
persistent depressive.
Yeah,
persistent depressive disorder. It's that you cannot pull yourself out of that you know, that rut. You can, and you know, chemically your brain's just not compensating for anything. And what we fail to realize is that sometimes a person's depressed because their environment is just undesirable. Right. They are surrounding themselves with the wrong people. They're absorbing the wrong information. You know, it's the whole nature versus nurture thing. And sometimes it is within people's nature, you know, and sometimes, like, for example, attention deficit disorders run in my mom's side of the family rampantly. You get me and my siblings and my mom in the same room, and you see us all forgetting what the fuck we were talking about and doing half the time. It's insane. I mean, you think I live in like a nursing home sometimes. Yes. but you know, a lot of the time it's the nurture aspect. I mean, I hate the whole nature versus nurture thing, because it's nature and nurture really. Both play a huge part in the human experience and what forms a human, especially for other development. Obviously, your genetics play a part, but what plays a larger part is the environment surrounding the person.
Right.
And we have to look at causality. What is causing a person to be a certain way? Because I mean, causality is pretty much what's behind everything in the entire world. Pretty much, you have to understand that, you have to understand cause and effect. Even it has an effect on human beings. The decisions that we want to make are kind of based on the environment around us. If I need money and I can't get a job or rely on the structures of society, I'm going to rob a bank or a convenience store. I'm going to rob a few convenience stores. I'm going to start selling drugs. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Causality is a part of the human experience, and it's hard to make causal claims. That's the thing. It's because we have to.
Yes.
People need to understand the difference between causation and association, or what's better known in statistics as correlation does not equal causation.
Yes.
A lot of things can correlate, but it doesn't mean that it's directly causing. You cannot make a conditional statement off of something that's just correlating with the issue at hand. That would be like saying cheese sales rise along with divorces. So you can, if you make a causal claim off of that, you're saying, oh, we need to stop selling so much goddamn cheese so that people stop getting fucking divorced.
It's the yield.
That's the thing that's kind of hard with psychology in general.
Yeah, it's so like ice cream sales increase with shark attacks in the summer. So it's like it's only the reason the only reason that the only reason they're so well correlated is because of this other source. But if you just don't know that source,
confounding variables.
Yeah, it can be like, oh shit, we need to stop selling ice cream, and these shark attacks will stop.
Yeah,
and a lot of people. I mean, again, with the COOF, it's a similar where it's like now we have data even more and more, and it just goes against that. But it seems that even then, people are duped as long as they have.
Yeah,
I don't know what it is. It's become it's become an egregore situation.
When it comes to making causal claims and association claims, you have to rule out. You have to rule out confounding variables, and that's just something you don't account for. Something else that's causing both of these variables to somehow associate with each other. So, like ice cream sales and shark attacks going up in the summer, more people are at the beach, and more people are buying ice cream because it's summer.
Yes,
that's your confounding variable right there.
Yeah.
It's we have to understand that.
Yes.
There's so many aspects to life and everything that's happening. You have to really take a step back. You can't just make a causal claim off of everything that you see and associates.
Isn't that such an important thing to talk about because of how many things like with how the African American community in this country has been screwed over by a welfare state. That was sold to them and destroyed a lot of people's lives. But it's almost even more intuitive to try and just draw that to whatever you learned in kindergarten about how slavery used to exist and be like, well, that's the correlation. Well, go read Up from Slavery by Booker T. Washington, who was a slave all the way up until he was 18, and he'll give you the exact points that people are still trying to make nowadays, which is he saw so many of his friends getting PhDs, black friends who were slaves getting PhDs, perfectly intelligent, but they couldn't get a job because of these people who would refuse to hire a black person.
Exactly.
And so he's like, how about you come and get a trade where you can start your own business and you don't need that. We can make our own, parallel economy or whatever and prove that we are just as efficient and intelligent as the white man is. But nowadays, it's so easy to sell the story that it's almost like, like you were saying earlier, the more you just throw it on the news and the more articles you make and the more it's in movies and music, the more it seems like, if it's everywhere, therefore it's true. When really it's just like, well, go back to the 1960s and you can correlate the fall of the black family and the fatherlessness and the divorce rate and the obesity rate among among black communities, and you can just tie it right with the Great Society and be like, well, shit, that's where it really started, or at least that's what caused a lot of the woes for black communities.
Yeah, well, and a lot of
Native American communities.
A lot of the time, poverty is inherited, and
right.
mental illness is inherited not only through genetics, but just through
right.
learning.
I mean, I've lived in the ghetto, dude. It sucks. It's a rough place to be. I mean, everything is negative, right? Everything sucks. And if you grow up in that, you're like, well, the only leadership you have
the world is
like
dark and depressing. It's chaos.
If the only leadership you have too is like gangsters and rap music and stuff, it's like, well, that's your culture and that's what you inherit as like
that's your reality.
That's your reality, right? And it's depressing. And that's the thing, is drug use. It's a feedback loop, right? Where it's a cycle.
Back to, if people cannot rely on the structures around them to have better lives, then they turn to illegitimate means to try and improve themselves, and then it ends up backfiring because of the fact that it's illegitimate means. And a lot of the time in these communities, what job do they have? What are they going to work at Dollar General? Well, then they got to get like 3 jobs, but they don't have enough money to have access to contraceptives half the time, and they have kids, and they don't have time to raise their kids because they're working all the fucking
short-term time preference,
and it's just
And then the ultimate conclusion these days is conservatives will say, well, put more cops in their communities. Oh yeah, that'll make it
horrible idea,
dude. Okay, that's
just gonna make them get arrested more often because they can't. That doesn't help them get more fucking money.
Ben Shapiro
just imprisons more of them.
Yes. So what does that end up doing? It pisses off the young people who see their fathers or their uncles or their leaders in their community getting arrested, the people that they see as leaders. And so, what Ben Shapiro, he literally said that on Joe Rogan. Well, I need to put more cops. And it's like, no, you fucking dunce. If you did that, what does that do? That makes them distrust police more because they're out to get them. They're out there, what is it called? The racial, where they try to, this, like what they did in New York where they stop and frisk shit. It's like, what is that going to do? It's going to make them hate cops even more.
Yeah, and then you need to give them more opportunity for working income.
What you need to do is
education.
Is cut the head off the Hydra or whatever, and what is it that Hercules did? What was it called when you solder a wound? Where that's what he did.
Cauterize.
Yeah, he cauterized the Hydra's the giant dog thing, the wound, and then it was finally dead.
Cerberus.
Yes, yeah, that's right, Cerberus. And that's exactly what needs to be done. It's not just, well, we're just going to keep cutting. And then the other side is just give more welfare to them and give more. And it's just
welfare doesn't work.
No,
welfare is garbage.
It does not. Yeah, welfare is garbage. And so, but we live in this world where it's like things that are intuitive and can be easily sold to dummies. They'll just be like, well, yeah, put more cops there. Give them more money. Like, this is not the solution.
I remember there was one program that took a lot of black women and their families and moved them into nicer neighborhoods and gave them good jobs, and the quality of life for their children and their education skyrocketed.
Yep.
You need to give people better opportunity. You need to give them the opportunity for better education.
You need to let people fail.
And if we weren't spending so much money on putting money in pockets of politicians and then just like fighting forever wars in the Middle East, we'd be able to put a lot more into providing better education and pay to the people of our society in general.
That's the thing. For me, what helped me get my shit together, because I was at the bottom, was it was my fault. Ultimately, it was my fault because I had never been taught how to fail, really. When I ended up failing and getting my shit together, that's what, like, it becomes this self-fulfilling thing where it's like the more I do for myself and fix myself, and the more I'm not hateful of others or blaming my own troubles on my people in my family that I didn't have good relationships with, or blaming on other people, the more I realize, like, hey, I'm taking responsibility for my life and it's bringing me nothing but good fruit. And when you allow someone to finally fail where they have nowhere else to go and they are at the level of just absolute humility, absolute humiliation, it makes them think like, man, I don't want to do this anymore. That guy over there who's driving a fucking Ferrari, I kind of like, I admire that dude. I admire this dude who got to his place through hard work and innovation and playing by the rules. And good for him. Good for those people who can do that. And that's what needs to be brought to communities who live in that perpetual cycle, not just
you have to allow them to live by legitimate means.
Right. Everyone should live by the same rules. Everyone should be on the same playing field in that terms, because if you rule people differently, you don't have a nation. You have you have a glob of splinter groups that all despise each other.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's essentially what it's continued to create in terms of racial tension as well.
Yes, most definitely.
The ghetto essentially remains an actual ghetto, like by definition, because the government isn't giving them better opportunities. They're just policing them harder.
Yeah.
They might as well be knocking down their doors and asking them if they're fucking hiding Jews anywhere. You know what I mean? Like,
yes. Well,
if you give people a set of rules, but they're not able to follow them, then you're just setting them up for failure.
Yeah, it's the lizard brain too. Is the more you demonize them, the more they're going to be very set in their ways, and then the more
they're going to react against you.
Yes, yeah, and the more you feed the lizard brain candy, the more it's going to be like, oh, I like that one. I like that party over that party. And it becomes like, okay, this is not a nation. Sorry, this is not a nation anymore if we're going to keep doing this. So, is there anything else you wanted to cover? Like
the thing overall, just just don't just listen to people, especially if they seem official. Stop just blindly listening to politicians. Even some scientists will come out with bullshit. Make sure if you're looking at a scientific thing that it comes through a peer-reviewed source. Stop listening to influencers and stop having parasocial relationships with people on social media. It's fucking destructive and cringy.
Yes.
Having people that are social media influencers, celebrities, are not people that you can rely on for official information, and they're going to poison your intellectual experience.
Wow.
God, especially now with the fucking information age and how people can just say anything online and get popular off their fucking bullshit just because it emotionally appeals to everyone. It's crazy. Make sure you look at the aspects of scientific research and just like research and reports in general, whether it's scientific, whether it's economic, whether it's statistical. It's you can't just rely on people to just tell you and then you to accept it. And I don't know how we haven't figured this out yet, because people keep trying to push that, since we're have such readily available access to information. Just stop fucking blaming each other so hard, man.
Yes. Love one another.
People just need to stop blaming each other so hard and hating each other.
That's funny too, is love solves this. Love solves this. if we learn,
it really does. I mean, genuinely.
If we learn to see each other's sides and like you said, the fucking parasocial relationships online, dude, that's so important, because that's where the hate is fueled. Is the fucking Hydra, dude.
Stop having parasocial relationships with fucking with social media influencers.
Ben Shapiro.
Because you're giving oh my god, you're essentially giving somebody some random fucking idiot so much power over you and other people, when you wouldn't do that to some random guy that's standing on the side of the road. I mean, it's the same fucking thing. It's just some random person that you find online that appears to have good opinions that appeal to your emotions.
Yes.
It's just it's destructive. It really is.
Yeah.
I mean, especially when people get into these, when people had horrible ideas, like people that are like fucking zoophiles and shit. We used to just demonize that on the local level, and then people got out of being fucking zoophiles half the time. But now when you get a bunch of fucking zoophiles on the internet and they have their own fucking forum, now you've got a group of people validating each other.
Oh, dude, see, that's a
and they think it's valid.
That's an interesting thing, because the uninhibited level of like no humility and shame has begotten so many like just people with like inescapable fucked up addictions and crazy
Yeah,
beliefs.
people with horrible addictions or just very destructive sexual tendencies. Even they get into these online forums where they validate each other and feel more normal, and they end up,
Exactly.
I mean, God, pedophiles have more power now with the internet than they did fucking before. Are you kidding
Yeah,
me? They
back
can sit
when
there and
NAMBLA was a
sit on
joke.
forums and just, yeah, it's crazy. And
um,
now these people are validating themselves and making each other feel normal.
yeah, yeah. That's an interesting subject. Maybe that'd be another good podcast to talk about.
Yeah, echo chambers.
Yeah, because it's it's what fuels the fire ultimately, and that goes back to
Yeah.
Cerberus, where there's so many heads that, I mean, it's multiplied so much. It's like it's gotten to the point where I'm just like ban anime. Like there's only, yeah, there's just like there's things where it's like if we just cauterized that wound, there'd be a lot less people who have gender dysphoria, you know.
ban the fucking waifus right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's like I'd probably be, I'm Austrian economic. I don't know how you say that. I'm not an economist. I'm an armchair economist, but I subscribe
Yeah.
to Austrian economics. I subscribe to libertarianism in an applicable way. But there's things. It's just like we live in a world now where it's like, okay, ban anime, ban things that are just what does this do to help anybody? I mean, what does having uninhibited access to pornography do for anybody? A certain point where you just gotta like we just gotta kind of be like, okay, maybe kids should not have access to the internet until they're like 16 or 13.
I definitely agree with that.
Yeah.
And we need to stop babysitting our kids with like fucking iPads and
Oh,
shit.
dude, it's everywhere now, and it's like it's gotten to the point. It's like, dude, that's what screwed me up. And you're giving your kids like iPads in their face, and Baby Shark and whatever. It's like that's how you create ADHD. Like, let these kids go out. Like when I was a little kid, I remember I remember it's like you and I think we talked about this. Like you and I, our generation, who are as old as we are, a little bit older, kind of had the remnants of the old world before the iPhones took over. And I
Yeah.
remember when I was a poor little 5-6-year-old, we lived in shitty apartments, and I just go out with my cap gun and shoot my buddy, and we would just
Yeah.
play.
We would build like entire battlefields in the backyard
Yeah,
and shoot
yeah,
Nerf
dude.
guns.
I mean, up until I was probably about 9 or 10, when the iPhones came out, and like everything just changed. The entire people changed. They got stupid.
Yeah.
They got boring.
Reality in general got very different and confusing.
Yeah,
rapidly.
and it's like I think that needs to be a discussion that at least us on like there's nonsense crazy people in the country who would probably be better off just living in California, and then there's the rest of us. The rest of us, and I think that line needs to be drawn. Like we just kind of like it is funny, but it's like that. Just we need to kind of like come to that consensus nowadays. Is like there are people in this country who just will never get it. They want the horrible policies. They're never going to change. Okay, let them run with it. Have fun. But the rest of us, who either don't care about politics, are just grill Americans and just never wanted any of that shit, or the rest, or who understand the benefits of community and the qualities of family of family values and early American, Lockean virtues and whatnot. We can say we got to be able to say like there's things that it's like we don't accept and we don't push for it, and we learn we basically before it gets way worse, we need to learn how to be parents again. We need to learn how to have a society again. So
well, because a big problem that we're missing in our developmental experience right now is the familial unit. Really, I mean, it's not exclusive to a certain group either. There's a lot of people in general growing up without a mother or without a father, or their parents are just completely neglective and don't really want to have anything to do with their kids, or they just don't have time for their kids even.
Parents have gotten just
families are in general.
Shitty.
Yeah, and families in general are just kind of disjointed. I mean, personally, my dad's side of the family, it's more so immediate for me. Like, I talk to my dad and my grandmother, and my aunts, but anybody else, they all just fucking hate each other.
Yeah,
and it's
I went through that same kind
it's
of
not
deal
it's
too.
not good. The familial unit is your primary. The familial unit's your primary baseline.
Yeah,
Whenever especially
your
when you're growing up.
foundation.
I mean, that's your immediate support. That's your foundation. And I mean, this goes down on the animal level. This isn't some
Yeah,
human fucking. This isn't some like political opinionated thing. I
This
mean,
is
as an
nature.
animal, you that's what you need. It's a natural thing. And if you're without that, I mean, as a child and growing into adulthood, it's very hard to effectively have your own family. Those issues are kind of passed down, and it's hard for those people to maintain decent relationships a lot of the time because
yes,
they never learn.
yes. Anyway, it was this is a nice long podcast. This is longer than I thought I'd be able to go.
Yeah.
So this is
we
good,
we,
we
we
covered a lot.
talked for about quite a few things.
Yeah,
that's gonna have to include quite a few things in the title
in the
tags.
description or the title or something. That was great, and you provided a lot here. I'm really psyched about if having you on again for something else to talk about. And
I'd love to, man.
Yeah. Thanks, Ryan. You take it easy, man.
Absolutely, man.
Okay.
You have a good one, Isaac.
Bye.